Hi everyone, welcome to the Eucalyptus leaf tutorial where I use a triadic colour scheme. For this painting I painted a little study before I painted my larger painting. I wanted to paint the leaves using a triadic colour scheme. A triadic colour scheme is one where you use contrasting colours that are not direct complementary colours. So instead of choosing colours that are directly opposite one another on the colour wheel, like I did for the magnolias, I chose 3 colours that are equal in distance around the colour wheel. I got my colour wheel out and I started with yellow because the leaves had some yellow in them. I counted around 4 colours and got to blue, and then another 4, and I ended at red. So red, yellow and blue sit in an equal distance around the colour wheel. For this painting I chose Windsor red, Windsor yellow and Windsor blue. I thought that they'd be safe colours to use. They're all staining colours, so I knew they'd pack a punch together and I knew that I'd be able to mix what I needed from them. I've got my drawing on a piece of Arches cold pressed watercolour paper. This is a 3-sized paper. I've stretched the paper and I've attached it to my gator board and I've got it in portrait orientation. I've got my 3 colours, Windsor red, Windsor blue red shade and Windsor yellow. And of course you don't have to use these colours. Use any red, yellow or blue that you have that might be similar. Here they are out in the palette for you. This is my Da Vinci Maestro number 7 round brush. I'm going to use this brush to paint some water onto the leaf on the left hand side. I'll wet the entire leaf with water. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to paint a layer of yellow over the top. And I find the water on the paper allows me to paint the paint on more easily. I don't have to rush when I put the paint on. I can take my time and paint it on carefully. Here's a look at the water that I've got on the paper. I haven't taken it all the way to the edge of the leaf as well. I've left a little gap of dry paper around the edge. There was no real need for me to take it all the way to the edge of the pencil line. So that's ready for me now to put some yellow paint on. Here I've got my Windsor yellow. I mix a bit of water with it, not a lot. And I start to paint that onto the wet paper. So this is going all over the leaf, even down onto the stem. And as I said, the water on the paper allows me to put the paint on there more easily. It's summertime here, it's hot, and the water on the paper just gives me a bit more time. I don't have to worry about the paint drying before I get it finished. Here I do take the paint all the way to the edge where my pencil line is, even though I didn't take the water all the way to the edge. So I've filled all that leaf in with yellow now. And I'll take it down onto the stem as well. I didn't wet the stem, there was no need for me to wet that. I'll take it all the way down there. Now I've gone ahead and I've done exactly the same thing on the other 2 leaves. The only things I haven't painted in are the 3 cast shadows beside the leaves. The leaves themselves have got a wash of yellow over the top. I've taken a photo of my painting at this stage and I've included it for you to download. This is Progress Photo 1. Now I want to mix some green so that I can paint in that first leaf. I'll get some yellow. I'm getting a new puddle of yellow here because my other puddle was a bit watery. I want a bit more pigment this time. I'll pick up some of the blue and mix that in. I might go a little bit darker. I'll put a bit more blue in it. And now I've gone too blue, so I'll put some more yellow into it. That's better. Okay, so my green paint is ready to go. My leaves are dry. They're completely dry. I've dried them with the hairdryer. Now I'm wetting the left-hand side of this leaf on the left side of the painting. I'm not wetting the entire leaf like I did before, just the left-hand side. And I'm not wetting the entire left-hand side, just half of it. I'll show you the water on the paper. Here you can see that I've taken the water all the way to the external edge this time. I'll show you why when I start to put the paint on. I haven't wet the entire left side. My water comes down to about here. When I put the paint on, I'll only take it up to about here. So I'll paint from the top down to there, and then that leaves me a little gap of water so that when I put the paint on, my paint edges will remain soft, and I'll be able to add some more water down on the bottom half of the leaf. If I was to put water over the entire left side of the leaf, it would dry before I got to paint on it. So I'll do it in sections. I find that's the best way to do it. Here I've got the green that I just mixed. I'm painting that onto the wet side of the leaf. The right side of the leaf is dry. I'm doing that deliberately. I'll show you why later on. So here I've got the green that I mixed from the two colours, and I'm going to dot it over the top, and I'll leave some of the yellow underwash showing. So I won't completely cover it with this green. I get the edges in and then I dot it through the middle. The reason I took the water all the way to the outer edge this time was because when I put the green paint on the outer edge, I want it to move with the water that's on the paper. So I want the water to distribute the pigment. If I'd left the outer edge dry, like I did when I put the yellow on there, when I put the green on, I'd end up with a hard paint line down my edge. I'm at the point where I need to stop with the paint and join up my water. So my water comes down to here. So now I need to wet the bottom half of the leaf. And I'm far enough away from the paint that when I put the water on, I won't disturb it. I take the water all the way to the bottom, but again, I'm only staying on the left-hand side of the leaf. When I've wet that entire left side, I pick up my green paint and I continue on. What I have to watch is that my brush isn't too wet. I've got water on the paper, I've got water in the paint. I don't need a great deal of water in my brush. My brush just needs to be damp when I pick the paint up. I keep going all the way down to the bottom of the leaf, and you can see I'm leaving some of that yellow underwash showing, so I'm not completely covering it. Because I've got the water on the paper, that's left soft paint edges around the marks that I've made. Just taking it down over the stem, and I make sure my edges are okay. When it was dry, I got my pencil out and I drew a little pencil line down the centre vein at the base of the leaf. That's the centre vein, and that will remind me not to put any water or paint there. And now I start to wet the paper on the other side. The left side of the leaf has completely dried. I'm not going to disturb it now with this water. So I've left a little dry patch down there. There's no water on that centre vein. I've got my green paint again. This side of the leaf isn't quite as green as the other side. It's got more yellow showing. So I'm going to put less of the green paint on. So you can see on the reference photo there's more yellow showing on the right-hand side. This water on the paper that I've got is keeping all my paint edges soft. So when I touch my brush to the paper, my paint edges around the edge of the mark that I'm making are soft. I'm not getting any hard, sharp lines anywhere. Okay, now I'm nearly up to my water line. My water finishes here. So now I need to wet the top section of the leaf. If I had wet that section earlier, it'd be dry by now. Okay, so that's all wet now. Using that green again, I continue on, just dotting it over the leaf, leaving yellow paper showing wherever I can, until I get all the way to the top. Just making sure my edges are okay. Okay, I've taken another photo of my painting, and here it is here. This is progress photo 2, and I've included it for you to download. Okay, back to my palette now. I want to put some darker green over the top. So to darken the green, I add more blue pigment. Because I painted it in 2 sections, I now have a vein down the middle. So I didn't really have to paint it in, it's already there for me. What I want to do now is to paint this darker colour that I just mixed over the top of that previous layer. So I make sure it's completely dry, and then I wet a section of it again. I'm only wetting the left-hand side again, not the entire leaf. I put the water on carefully, because I know wherever the water is, that's where the paint will go. So now I'm using that darker green paint that I mixed with more blue in it. And like before, I let the other layers show through, so I don't completely cover them with this layer. So painting on the wet paper still with the darker green. You can see I'm trying to leave some of the yellow showing through and some of that lighter green. I think what I might do is take the paint out of my brush, use my damp brush just to feather away at that paint a little bit, blend it together more. Then I wet the paper up further, same way I've been doing it on this leaf. Try not to get it on the other side just yet. And then I keep going with that darker green. Here I'm running it down the centre vein. And I keep dotting the paint on, and I'm mindful of leaving the other layers showing. Now I'm wetting the left-hand side of this leaf in the middle with some water. I haven't wet the entire left-hand side, just the bottom half. Now I want to mix an orange, so I'll use some of the red and I'll put some yellow into it. I'll wash the paint out of my brush in between, picking up the colours so that I don't dirty one colour with the other. I need a bit more yellow, I think. And then I'll use that colour on the left-hand side where I've wet the paper. This leaf is a little bit different to the green one that I just painted because you can't see as much yellow, so I'm going to cover more of the yellow with this. The yellow will then act as an underwash that will help the orange paint to glow. I'll take it down the stem. The yellow underwash will also be showing through on the centre vein. Now I'm painting the water on the top half of the leaf, just on the left-hand side still. And then I keep going with the orange paint. I've switched down to my number 5 brush now. It's a bit smaller. This leaf is smaller, so I think I need it rather than that larger 7. I take that paint all the way to the top of the leaf. You can see a little patch of yellow showing in the middle there. That side dried, so I'm not going to disturb it now with this water. I paint the water down the right-hand side, keeping it off the left-hand side. And off I go again with the orange paint. I can wet the bottom half now. I didn't wet it all because it would dry before I get to paint on it. I kept the water off that centre vein where I'm painting now, so you can still see that yellow paint down the centre. And I take the red over the other side. So that's giving me that little vein down the middle there at the bottom of the leaf. And here is progress photo 3 that you can download that corresponds with this part of the tutorial. If you look at the reference photo, there's a lighter area on the leaf just here, whereas down lower and up higher here and down here it's a bit darker. So what I want to do is darken those darker areas. I want to do that on wet paper, again because I don't want any hard paint edges. So I'll wet the entire bottom section of the leaf now, both sides, even over the top of the vein. I wet the paper further than where I'll be putting the paint as well. So if I keep my paint away from the edge of the water, then I'll get those soft paint edges that I'm looking for. So I've wet a larger area than where I need. I only need to put the paint down through this area here. So I need a darker red. So I use the Winsor red again, but I don't really want to use the straight pure pigment. So I'll mix some of the Winsor yellow with it to make more of an orange colour. I'll get some more out. So I've got more pigment in this mixture, less water. And I'll use that on this wet area. So this area I saw was darker on the reference photo. So I'll paint this on, and the wet paper keeps my paint edges soft. So I'm not going to get any hard lines where I don't want them. I paint straight over the top of the vein because on the reference photo, the vein, you can hardly see it there. So I don't need it to be lighter in colour. It's in shadow there. You'll still see that there's a vein there, but it won't be a bright yellow colour. Now I've taken the paint out of my brush, and I'm just going to soften that paint edge away even further. I might run it over my vein just to bring it out again a little bit, so you can see that there is a vein there, but it's not very light in colour. Now I start to wet up further where I see that darker section on the reference photo. Again, I take the water further than where I'll be putting the paint. I keep my paint away from the edge of the water, then I'll get those soft paint edges that I want. So then I pick up my red paint, and on that goes onto the wet paper, where I see it's darker on the reference photo. Because I'm painting within the water, both sides of this shape will have soft paint edges. I might put a bit of that darker colour up the top here too. My paper is wet up the top here as well. I've just taken the paint out of my brush and I just dabbed off the excess moisture. And I use it to feather away that paint edge so that it's softer. I can do it here as well because it's still wet. That's okay, I quite like that. I think I'll leave that as it is. I've just taken a photo of my painting and I've included it here for you to download. This is Progress Photo 4. Now I want to get some colour on this leaf on the right. This one I can wet the left-hand side of it, but I'll do it all at once because it's small enough. I don't need to paint it in sections the way I did the other two. For this leaf I want more of an orange colour, so I'm going to need more yellow this time. I'll mix the yellow and red together, but it will have more yellow in it. I'll take some of this and I'll get a bit more red, I think. I'm just out of the camera frame there, I'm sorry, I didn't realise when I was mixing it. But I've got more yellow in this one, so it's more of a yellowy orange colour. It's got a fair amount of pigment in it as well, so not a lot of water. I'm still using my number 5 brush and I paint that onto the wet paper on the left hand side. Here I'm going to leave a little bit of the yellow underwash showing in places, so I won't completely cover it with this orange. Take it down the stem and then I keep going. Now if your paint spreads out of control and you lose all your yellow paper, you've probably got your paint too watery, so you might need a bit more pigment in it. If you find that it covers the paper completely and it doesn't sit where you're putting it, it's probably because it's too wet, or your brush might be too wet. So adjust one of those things. Try and get a little bit of that yellow paper still showing by the time you've put the orange over it. You can see I've got a few little spots there. While that's wet, I'll pick up some of the orangey red and I'll paint that onto this orange that I've just painted. I'll dab it on. This is called charging, where you drop one wet colour onto another wet colour. You let the colours blend and merge on the paper. Creates some interesting effects. I'll take that all the way down the stem, I think. And then, because it's still wet up here, I'll put a bit more up here. Now, if your paper was starting to dry, you'd need to let it dry completely before you did this. Re-wet it with water and then put this redder colour on. Don't try and do it if it's starting to dry. Here I've taken the paint out of my brush. I'm softening my paintage a little bit. I dried it off with my hairdryer and now I'm wetting the other side of the leaf with water. Now I've got that lighter orange, the one with more yellow in it, and I do the same thing on this side. Looking at the reference photo, there's a bit of a gap there where there's some green colour, so I've jumped over that and left the yellow paint showing. Now I've got some of the green paint that I used on that leaf on the far left, and I'm dropping that into that area. So that was the yellow and blue mixed together. Now I'm wetting up the top half with water. Got some more of the yellowy orange. I'm pretty much covering over the entire yellow background there. Now I'm getting the red orange, the orange that's got more red in it. I'll drop that on while it's wet. So all of this is on wet paper. It keeps all those paint edges soft. If I was to paint this on dry paper, I would have hard paint edges everywhere. And then a bit more of the yellowy orange up the top. I've I've taken a photo of my painting at this stage, and again I've included it for you to download. This one is progress photo 5. Back to my palette now. I'm getting some blue and I'm going to mix some red with it. I want to make a sort of a grey colour if I can, so I want more blue than red. And now I get the red. Mix them well. I kept going and I added a bit of water to it, just so that it wasn't too dark. I'm on my middle leaf here and I'm painting some water onto the right hand side of it. I'll get some of that grey that I just mixed and I'll paint that onto the wet paper. What I'm doing is starting to paint in some of the darker markings that I see on the leaves. I want the paint to bleed, so I want it to give me those soft paint edges. You can see when I run it down the edge, not only can I tidy up the side of my leaf with that darker colour, but I can create those darker markings that are on the leaf. Just get a bit more paint. Dab that onto the wet paper. When this dries, it won't be as dark as it looks now. I'll wet down a bit lower now and I'll keep going with that colour. So once it hits the water, you can see that it bleeds. And as I said, this gives me a chance to tidy up this edge here. Now I've picked up a bit more pigment. My paper's still wet and I'm darkening a section of it. My paper's not as wet as it was, so the paint won't move quite as far. There's a few spotty marks on the leaves, so I can paint that in with this colour as well. Again, I'll wet the paper with water and I'll paint on the wet paper. I pick up that colour and I paint it onto the wet paper. Now if it spreads too far, as I said before, you might have too much water on your brush. Perhaps you've got too much water in your paint. So when you put it on, you want the paint to spread a little bit, but you don't want it to go out of control. So if it does go out of control and spreads too far, somewhere you've got too much water. It could be on the paper. So just check those things. Check the paper, check your brush, and check your paint mix. You could sop some water off your paper if it's too wet. You could mix a bit more pigment into your paint if it's too wet. And you could dab your brush on a cloth if it's too wet. Just try those different things to see if that helps. Here I've put the water on the paper and I've spread it out with my brush so that there's no puddles of water lying anywhere. I pick the paint up, I dab it on. You can see it's moving because there's water on the paper, but it's not spreading too far and making a huge mark. I do the same thing up here. I wet the paper. Spread the water out, pick up my paint, and then dab it onto the paper. Now I'm not really looking at the reference photo when I do this. I'm not following it the way I see it, and I'm not doing too many marks. I don't want to overdo it. So I'm just being a bit more selective as to where I put these marks. And I do come back later and darken them on dry paper, so don't try to get them too dark just yet. These aren't finished yet. There is another progress photo that you can look at. Leaving the red leaf now, I'm coming over to this one. I'm going to do exactly the same thing here. I wet the leaf with water, I pick up that grey coloured paint, and then I paint it on. And you can paint this colour on wherever you like. You could use my progress photo 6 to guide you, or you could do your own thing with this. But the whole time I'm wetting the paper before I put the marks on, and I'm wetting sections of it. I don't wet it all at once, just the area where I want to work. You might have a really untidy edge that you want to tidy up with this colour. So I've wet this one over here as well, and I'm using that same colour to make marks wherever I like. Just wet a section at a time. Some marks will be bigger than others. Some will be long, some will be small, some will be against the vein, and some will be against the outer edge. Here's a progress photo that I've taken of my painting. Use this photo to help you get to this stage. This is progress photo number 6. Okay, now I want to darken the leaf in the middle in those darker spots. If you look at the reference photo, you can see that darker area there where I'm painting now. Mine's not dark enough, I don't think. I think I could make it a bit brighter, a bit more vibrant there. So again, I wet the paper with water because I want soft edges around the outside edge of the shape that I'll make. On my brush, I've got Winsor Red. I haven't mixed it with anything. It's straight Winsor Red. That's going onto the wet paper where I see that darker area on the leaf. To get the paint nice and vibrant, I'm taking the paint from the wet puddle here on the palette. Straight Winsor Red. It's got a fair amount of pigment in it. It's going to really brighten this leaf up in these areas. I won't put it all over it, just in the darker spots. Spread it out. Take it right to the edge. And I keep it within the edge of the water. So if I take it out past the edge of the water, I'll get a hard line. So just there, I think I went past the edge of the water, so I had to put a bit more water there. I'll just get a bit more paint, and then I'll take the paint out of my brush. So I wash it out, there's nothing on it now. And I use my clean brush to spread that paint out where I want it, keeping it within the edges of where I've wet the paper. There's still nothing on my brush. This edge up the top here, I think I could soften it a bit more with my clean brush. Now down the bottom here, if you look at the reference photo, it's a bit darker on the reference photo down here. Mine's not dark enough, I don't think. I think I could make my leaf look a little bit more dramatic with some darker colour on it. Just creates a bit more contrast. Here I'm wetting down the bottom, the left-hand side of the leaf, so that I can get a bit of the vein showing down the bottom. I don't really want the dark red to go over the top of the vein at the bottom of the leaf. So I've left the vein dry down the bottom there, where I'm painting now. Okay, I think I've got enough paint there for now, so I'll take the paint out of my brush. I'll use my clean brush just to move the paint where I want it. I'll take it over the vein there, but I'll leave a little bit of the vein showing down the bottom. Pull it down the stem. Now I'm thinking I want some of my yellow. So with a wet brush, I wipe it over the pigment that's gone hard. That gets a bit of yellow on the brush. And I'm going to paint it just here. Dab it in. It creates a bit of interest down there. That's called charging, where you drop one wet colour onto another. Here I've got my clean brush, so there's no paint on it, and I'm moving the paint where I want it. The paper is dry where I am now. Spreading that paint out and softening those edges. Getting a bit more red because I've just wet it with my damp brush. There's water on the paper now. And I can darken that other side. Okay, so that's the bottom section. Up the top here, it's still wet. I'm going to use a bit of yellow. I'm going to drop that in there just to add a bit of interest. Don't do that if your paper's dry. If your paint had started to dry, you'd need to let it completely dry and then re-wet it with water to put the yellow on. If you put that paint on while it was starting to dry, you risk creating a watercolour bloom. I have a video all about watercolour blooms here on Patreon if you're not sure what they are. I've taken another photo of my painting. This is progress photo 7 and I've included it for you to download. Now I want to add a bit more colour to the leaf on the right hand side. So I want to mix up sort of a reddy orange colour for it. So I'll use yellow and I'll use some of the red. Mix a bit more of the yellow and the red into it so that I've got enough. Okay, my paint's ready. Now I'll wet the area where I want to paint. I'll pick up that colour and I paint it where I've wet the paper. Not really looking at the reference photo now, I'm doing my own thing more or less. What I'm trying to do is make the leaves look more vibrant. Jump off the paper more. Trying to add a bit more contrast. I might do a bit down here on the bottom of it. I'm wetting the left hand side of it. And then on goes that colour again. Take it down the stem. Alright, I think I might come over to the green leaf now because I've brightened the other two or made them a bit more vibrant. I need to increase the colour on this one, make it look a bit more exciting looking. So I'm going to wet this one with water, but on this leaf I'm going to use some yellow. So I wet where I want to put the paint. This is on the right hand side of the leaf. I'm going to take it all the way down to the bottom, I think. I'm not doing anything fancy here so I can get the paint on there fairly quickly. I don't need to wet it in sections. Now I'm spreading the water out so that it's evenly covered. Now I'll get some yellow. Straight yellow, nothing mixed with it. And I'll paint that onto the wet paper on the right hand side of the leaf. So that will brighten that leaf up. And then all three leaves now will be nice and vibrant. Windsor yellow is a semi-transparent yellow because I'm putting it on with some water mixed into it and also water on the paper. It's quite transparent and you can still see the other colours coming through underneath it. I'll take that colour all the way to the top. I don't think I'll worry about putting it on the other side of the leaf. Okay, we're nearly finished. What I want to do now is mix a colour with the three colours mixed together. This will give me a dark grey brown colour that I'm going to use on dry paper on the leaves. So this is all three colours mixed together. I'll get some yellow now. Until you get a dirty, muddy brown, grey sort of a colour. Now I'm going to use that colour on the dry paper. Basically what I'm doing here is painting over some of those marks that I made earlier. So So this is really the only area of the painting where I'll be painting on dry paper. When I do this, I don't really want to make too many new marks. I want to try and work over the areas where I painted the marks before. I'm also trying to vary the size of them and the shape of them. So I don't want them to be little perfectly spaced spots or dots. They're just smudgy marks, more or less, over the marks I've already made. There might be a few extra that I do. Again, if you've got any yucky edges where your paint hasn't dried very well, you could use this colour to try and disguise it a little bit. You can see I'm trying to vary the shape and the size of them. Again, I'm not really looking at my reference photo. I'm tending to do my own thing here. So there, I probably didn't like my edge, so I've put a bit more colour there. And here again, you can use my final painting to help you with this. You can see on there where I've put them on. And then I do the same thing on this green one. I probably should have started with the green one so that I don't disturb the other ones. So here's my finished painting to help you when you do yours. Now I want to mix a shadow colour up. So I think for this I'll just use the red and the blue, and I'll sort of make a bluey grey colour, I think. I don't think I need yellow for this, so if I just stick with the red and the blue and then mix a colour that you're happy with. It doesn't have to be the same as mine. The main thing is that it's not too dark because I don't want it to overtake the leaves. So when I put it on, I'll put it on wet paper, and that will keep the colour toned down a bit. That looks pretty close to what I want, I think. So I'll wet the paper with water. This is the same as when I painted that yellow wash on at the very start of the painting. The water on the paper helps me to get the paint on there without me worrying too much about the paint drying before I get it finished. It also helps to keep the paint a bit paler so that it's not too dark. I worry that if I put my shadow on too dark, it will overpower the leaves. What I want to do is enhance the leaves and lift them off the paper. There's a little shadow on this side of that one. I've wet the paper up here, and now I'm painting the shadow colour in here. I've only wet the shadow itself. I haven't wet past the shadow. Stayed within my pencil lines. You can, of course, paint this on dry paper. Just use the watery paint on the dry paper. Just do whatever you're comfortable with. I'm more comfortable painting on the wet paper, but you might find it easier to paint on the dry paper. I feel the only thing you have to watch is that you don't put your shadow on too dark. And now I've done the same thing with this leaf in the middle. Up the top here with this tiny little area, I'm painting on dry paper. There's no need to wet that little thin area with water. Same down the side here. I did that on dry paper there too. One last little thing I'm doing now is painting over some of the darker spots with a mixture of the three colours. Sometimes you might get a bit of your shadow colour on the leaf and it might look a bit untidy, so you could use that darker colour to tidy it up if you need to. And I think that's about it. So there's my finished painting. Practice these leaves. You could paint them again and again, over and over, until you get something that you're happy with. You also don't have to paint them quite as large as I have here. You could use a smaller piece of paper and smaller brushes. So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial.